Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Chase Jarvis. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live show here on Creative Live. You guys know this show. This is a show where I sit down with the world's top creators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders with the goal of unpacking their brains and extracting valuable insights to help you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. My guest today, you will very quickly recognize him as soon as I say he's the co-founder of LinkedIn. He's a partner at Greylock Venture Capital, which is one of the top firms in the history of the world. And he's now, well, he's so many other things, aside from being the Oracle of Silicon Valley, which has him touching or basically a core part of dang near every social network that's ever been invented, an investor in so many of the top companies, folks like Airbnb, and he introduced Zuck to his first investor back in it was like he's been involved in everything, and most importantly, he's got a new podcast out called Masters of Scale. We're going to talk about it. My guest today is Mr. Reid Hoffman. Reid?
Awesome to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I appreciate it. It's a long time in the making. You're a busy guy, but very grateful to have some time with you today.
Delighted.
Awesome. Speaking of podcasts, which we're recording right here, let's go right into yours. Congratulations. It's like I saw it. I screen capped it the other day. The Chase Jarvis Live show and Masters of Scale were both right at the top of the iTunes and the little player there. What was give me the story behind it?
So maybe 5 years ago, I realized that what Silicon Valley people tell the world about why Silicon Valley is magical is a radically outdated story. And so what Silicon Valley people, well, first, why is Silicon Valley special? Yeah. Half of the NASDAQ created here. Right, there's 3 million people in the whole area. That's not the people in the tech industry. That's 3 million people in the area. Roughly half of the $100 billion plus new companies created here. Why is that?
What is the magic?
Right, what is the magic?
Yep.
So the old story, which is important, but now no longer the real story, you say, well, we have immigrants, entrepreneurs, technologists, technology companies, venture capital, major tech universities, you put them in a soup, you stir it up, you have a culture that allows a kind of a no fear of failure or limited fear of failure to kind of run at these impossible problems, and then some of them work and magic. And that's true, but that now exists in easily 50 places in the world.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that. So if you say, well, if that was only the story, then there'd be 50 Silicon Valleys.
And it's still not special then. Yep.
Yes. And why is it that Silicon Valley is still amazing? And the answer is that we actually, in fact, have built a playbook around how to go to global scale very quickly that's kind of implicit, shared in the talent network, constantly evolving. I taught a class a couple years ago at Stanford called Blitzscaling.
Very successful.
I'm working with my co-author Chris Ye on a book now on that, on Blitzscaling. And June Cohen, who is the former executive producer of TED, who, delightful human being and super talented, came to me and said, hey, I think this would make a great podcast. Would you do this? And I was like, podcast? I hadn't really thought about that. And you're super creative. I mean, I know good content. I know how to ask good questions. But making something magical, that's your business and yours, both yours and June. Hers, yeah. So sure, I'd be delighted to do that. And it's been a blast.
It's so dense, the information that you pack into these podcasts. And I try and represent the same thing here to the folks listening and watching at home. But the reality of access, I mean, we've had folks like yourself, Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, Reid Hoffman, the world's best. And yet I have a different relationship with those folks. I still consider them friends or mentors or advisors to some of the things that I'm doing and wildly inspirational. But you have a peer relationship with these folks, and that allows you, I think, to get something special out of it. Now, right before we started the cameras rolling, I was like, how is it? And you're like, is it fun? Are you having fun? And I'm going to paraphrase. I was like, I didn't know it was going to be fun, but now you're having a blast. And what is it about what you're doing that's joyful for you?
I think the thing that's joyful is it's very easy to have a warm and a uniquely insightful conversation because my friends know that I'm not there trying to to get them to spill a secret or to catch try to get them into saying something that they don't want to say. That my entire goal is I know there's a bunch of things that they know and think that are super valuable to entrepreneurs around the world, to anyone who's interested in this kind of magic of how do you scale companies. And my only goal is to help them express that through a set of different questions.
Yeah.
And because I know them, I actually have some partial map to what that is. Yeah. Now, part of the joy is not just the camaraderie, the ease of the conversation, but also part of it is that actually, in fact, while some of it I know already, there's also parts of it that I go, oh, that was really interesting. I hadn't realized that.
Some gaps in the story.
Yes, exactly.
There.
Like that was really cool, and I learned something, and that's awesome too.
Yeah, it's the ability to have a heartfelt conversation with someone in an environment. This used to be live. There used to be, somewhere between 100 to 200 people, and I love that. Now we've just got a little camera here in the corner. For those of you who are at home and listening, we are broadcasting this via Facebook Live, but it used to be a big event, and I realized that creates a lot of again, noise and joy, and then all these people are tweeting and all doing all this stuff. It's valuable, but the conversation, there was a gap between what I could get in this environment relative to the really highly produced event, so to speak. So that's why this is mostly podcast these days. Let's go talk about some of your guests. And for the folks at home, you should subscribe. It's Masters of Scale. With Reid Hoffman, and I subscribed. I've heard the Zuck one. Why don't you talk about some of your favorite, recent episodes so the folks at home get a flavor?
Well, all of my children are beautiful.
Oh, that's right. You can't throw anybody on the bus. I'm just thinking, if I reverse that question, that's a very tough question. Couple of highlights. How about that? Couple of highlights.
Well, so, for example, one of the ones that I was referring to that I had thought that in the history of Facebook, I was aware that early one of their cultural values was move fast and break things.
Yep.
And now it's move fast with scalable infrastructure. And so I had done what most people...
Not nearly as sexy, by the way.
No, not nearly as sexy. And I had actually made that kind of simple outside view of, they learned more traditional business and they changed a point of view. And so I asked Zuck about this, thinking that the question I was asking was, how did you grow and learn in your management structure? Because Zuck is an infinite learner. It's one of the things that's among the many things that's awesome about him. Yeah. That's one of the things that's awesome. And so I was expecting to get a little, here's what I learned. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean it changed? I'm like, well, phrase 1, phrase 2, change. He's like, no. We're always about speed. We're about speed of execution and effectiveness. In the early stage, that's move fast and break things. However, if you're breaking things at the big stage, fixing them slows you down, right? And so it's still optimizing for speed. It's just you have to realize that you have to keep stable infrastructure to optimize for speed. And I was like,
Bing.
Of course, right? Makes total sense.
Of course. So you had, I think everyone runs to the Zuck episode because you guys have a special relationship, because there's a lot of insight, but also Sheryl Sandberg.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yep, and Sheryl is a simply world-class leader that I think other world-class leaders learn from.
For sure.
One of the things that Sheryl really kind of typifies a lot of what we're trying to do in blitzscaling, which is I know what the shape of things will be such that you set them up now with lightweight work and then you scale much more effectively. And one of the powerful examples that she uses, because what people don't realize is setting up culture in these companies is really important. And that culture of how do we get to scale and preserve our mission, our coherence, our identity, as opposed to, now it's a big bureaucratic organization. Yeah. So she has this great anecdote that she learned from her Google days, which was, she started saying, we're warm and personal, so they would celebrate everyone's birthday on the day. Then you get to a group of 100 people, and you're celebrating a birthday every day.
Every day.
Right? And so then they moved to, we're going to celebrate the June birthdays, the July birthdays, the August birthdays. And of course, what that then does is that sets everyone back, and they go, now we're a big company.
It's like you took something away.
Yeah, it took something away.
Yeah.
And so part of the lesson that Sheryl illustrated is say, look, be careful when you're setting up some of these things. So you just set it up from the very beginning of, we do August birthdays. That's what we do. And then, it's still special and it's still going, and it's a scalable mechanism. And it's those little simple things that help keep that sense of we are still the people that we were and the people we're on path to. And that kind of leadership technique, simple, easy, concrete, learnable by everybody, is the kind of joys that you get from Cheryl.
And the wisdom, I'll borrow a phrase from Tony Robbins, 2 millimeters. The difference between those two things is like 2 words, right? We're going to celebrate everyone's birthday or August birthdays.
Yes.
And it's so narrow, but it's so critical for the long, it's incredible vision. So I'm not going to blow any more secrets from the episodes, but fantastic. Kudos, a lot of great reviews coming in. I love how well it's produced. I think you guys have done a bang up job, so keep going.
Yeah, that's all June and the team. Original music, all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Like when I listened to it, I was like, oh, that's really good. Is that what you had in mind?
Wildly creative. Obviously we pride ourselves on making really powerful content here at Creative Live. That was super good stuff, so I'm hyped. Good job. I'm going to make this personal now. So you and I share something. I don't know if you know this or not,
Yes,
but aside from me being in the Greylock family, which full disclosure, you guys are investors.
Happy, proud investors.
Yeah, thank you very much. You've been on the platform before, but we both share a background in philosophy. And I remember the first time I told my folks that, actually it was not my folks, it was my parents' friend. We were at a dinner party and I was like, yeah, I'm majoring in philosophy. And like, were you going to philosophize about being unemployed? And yet, here I am, and this is one of my favorite things about the world we live in. There's a million paths to get to anywhere, and yet philosophy has served me so well. And before I share why or how it served me, your background, you have some background. You got to be MA in philosophy, right, from Oxford? I think.
Master's studies. Yep.
Yeah. So I know you also had some, was it AI or computer intelligence or computer systems or whatever, but a little bit of your background in education, and then the point I'm trying to make here is that you can basically have any kind of background and go to a million different places. But talk to me about philosophy first and your schooling.
So I've always had my primary interest is in human nature and human condition across everything. So when I was an undergraduate at Stanford, I was majoring in something called symbolic systems, artificial intelligence, cognitive science. And when people asked me what I was doing, I called myself a transcendental anthropologist, which was a kind of a Kantian view
of transcendental
kind of,
meditations,
yes,
Kant. Yeah,
yes,
there you go.
Exactly.
Sorry, some nerd stuff out there.
Yes, we're philosophy geeking. And then what I realized at Stanford was that while we had these literally leading edge, world-class inventors in language, mind, artificial intelligence, cognitive science, we, as a set of theorists, lacked an understanding of what thinking was, really, what speaking was. And I went, okay, well, maybe it's time to go do professional philosophy, because philosophers have been wrestling with this question probably since long before there was, scrolls and manuscripts.
Right. Clergy back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, doing it. And so I was fortunate enough to win a Marshall, go to Oxford, and what I most valued, actually, so I went there with the theory that I was going to learn a lot about thinking and language, and I think I learned that everyone's pretty confused in these topics, including philosophers. Although there's some philosophers who don't think.
Were you studying like Wittgenstein and Chomsky and?
Wittgenstein for sure.
Okay.
So you read 3 papers. It was Wittgenstein, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of science. Because it was kind of like, what are the 3 different angles to try to understand this, and what I actually learned much more than the kind of the subject study, which is what I had started with, was how to think and communicate precisely. Like one of the things that I had this kind of delightful first tutorial experience where I wrote a paper. It was crap, is what it was, and my tutor opened with what is a classic Oxford philosophy line, which he says, there is both good and original thought in what you've written. The original parts are not good, and the good parts are not original. Right? And that was the most positive thing in the next hour conversation. Wow. And that experience was an enormously honing experience of taking the activity of thinking and writing much more seriously to when you're presenting something, to try to be as close to true as possible and try to be precise about it and understanding the nuances of it. Because one of the things that I found about philosophy training was that I got a lot better, not just in thinking and arguing, but also in a question of like theorizing. Like what is an accurate theory? Like, so for example, one of the things I do on startup companies on the board of is to say, well, what's your theory of winning this game? And part of the things that underlies the precision of the expression of that theory is actually my philosophy training, right? It's like,
Brilliant.
Do we understand really what your strategy is and really what the moving parts are,
Yep.
and what your theory is about why you're going to win this game?
I love I'll share that our interests, I think you can only connect the dots looking backwards, and I'll confess that I went into it just I was pre-med and was being whipped by culture's values of what's successful, and then when I started tapping into philosophy, and this is how I'm going to bring it around to the folks who are listening, largely creators and entrepreneurs that are watching and listening to the show, is that the ability to explicate what you mean. And for me, originally it was art, how to position the product that I was creating relative to a million other people and why it was beneficial or different. And that certainly carried on into my life as an entrepreneur, being able to be precise about displaying the vision and mission that you have or that you're going for. It turns out getting other people to be excited about your stuff is very valuable. And if you can't tell people what you're doing or why, or in the case of a creator, trying to get people excited about what you're building, what you're making and selling, that you're going to struggle. No. So there's this, I'll never forget, Leon Rosenstein, this is one of the professors at the fine institute of San Diego State. San Diego State, where I went, not so fine, I went there on a soccer scholarship. However, he wrote, it's more important to have a well-formed rather than well-filled mind.
Yes.
So I feel like philosophy gave that.
By the way, since his art is an interest, let me share with you a funny experience I had a year or two ago. So I'm always very curious to learn about art. I actually don't know very much. I know that a lot of people know more. And so I went to this event at MoMA, and I did the kind of that earnest student thing, and I sat in the front row because I was like, I want to learn about this. And so the curator starts up and says, so I'm going to start with some pieces by my favorite up-and-coming artist, or one of my favorite up-and-coming artists. And it's this professor at the MIT Media Lab, Neri Oxman, who's a friend. And I was like, wait, I know something. I know a little.
That's right.
It was awesome. Anyway, so it was a funny art delight thing, because I actually agree with you about that creativity, that invention. Not only is that super important for the human condition, super important for how we express ourselves, we find our identities, how we make something of ourselves in the world, have meaningful lives. But I actually think part of this whole understanding of kind of the art world and being able to express it precisely is, I think that as we go more into the world of automation and kind of workforce change, actually, in fact, those elements of creativity are going to be critical for many of the job industries that are going to be growing. Yeah. And so I actually think it's more important than ever that we actually learn that, study it, promote it, enable it within the world. So
beautiful, and that's a feather in the cap for everyone who's listening, watching. I just gave a keynote at the Next Web, the big European tech conference, and the title of the keynote was "Creativity is the New Literacy," focused specifically on, and right before me was a robot on stage, and it's a tech conference, so I got to be the very unpopular person and say, all right, future is AI, AR, VI, VR, all of the acronyms, and that only works if the machines are a layer on our own creativity. And obviously somewhat controversial, but I really, and it's great to hear you sort of underscore or punctuate that point. That is one of the things that separates us from some of the other species on the planet, and our ability to not just think critically, but take two things at one point unlikely to be connected, putting them together to make something new and novel. And so there you go. One of the brain of Silicon Valley is focusing us on creativity. If you're not paying attention, you heard it here, at least first. First, you're the first smartest person besides me who said it on this show. Creativity is new literacy. So if we're following, I'm going to pull on that thread for a second. One of the ways that we talk about how fortunate we are to have the investors that we have is that you all see 10,000 deals a year, and you have to choose 10. And in many ways,
0 to 2 per partner.
0
to 2 per partner.
2 per partner per year.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
So very, very, very few. And to me, what that underscores is not how lucky we are, but that you have had to become great at curating. And the curation is a taste point of view, and it's based also on all kinds of data, where that data is explicit, means ones you can grab and hold on a piece of paper and look at balance sheets, or implicit, like founder DNA or where the market's going. Do you think of yourself as a curator, and what role does that play in your thesis around investments, and how do you see the next big thing?
So that's interesting. I definitely think of myself as an editor and an investor. I tend to think of curators as putting a set of things in juxtaposition, like a museum curator is, well, this is how I do the hallway, this is what I put next to each other, this is how I set up the thing. And so I don't tend to do that across my investments.
That's interesting.
Because each investment is like a unique kind of shot on goal. The way I think about it, this, going back to our philosophy backgrounds, is Archimedean levers. Like the company, the technology, the product, the service is a lever by which you move the world. And can you make that lever big and robust enough through kind of go-to-market strategies, building a product, building a service, et cetera. And so each one is actually, in fact, more unique. In part because, by the way, part of what you tend to do when you invest in something is you ally with it, and you become we're trying to help this work. And so you have to be careful that if you have projects that are in the same space, both of those projects are super comfortable with you being involved with both projects, right? So to some degree, it tends to be and now for something kind of different, and now for something different, and now for something different versus curation. Now the thing that you do, though, is that you're looking for some combination of amazing entrepreneurial talent, something that makes a huge difference if it pulls off its risks and works, and that's something that that initial plan for getting there, which always changes over time, is something that shows a coherent shot on that market, a shot on that goal, and the challenge of the curation is you meet lots of people and lots of projects you'd love for them to work. They're interesting to do. And the challenge you end up with is 0 to 2 per year. So
this is interesting. If you burned at your interesting projects, you'd be done in June 8th.
Yes, exactly.
Or January 8th.
Yes, exactly. Right. And so part of the discipline comes to, is this one of those few? Right? Because if you do just one of those few, then you end up with because, by the way, the other thing about them is frequently these projects are 10 plus year journeys.
Right. We're 7 years in. Who would have thought?
Yes.
My God.
And so you really go into it. And so that's the kind of thing. And so it has that highly selective, highly thought combination of art and science. There's always some art in the judgment, as well as metrics and data and science and learning and expertise. And then when you go, you're in it for a while. Yeah,
I guess. I feel it. I feel the support from you guys, and I watch you interact with other founders. You guys do a good job bringing us together. We just at a summit. I find those things incredibly valuable. I get to hang out with other people who are all on this together, all having the same problems.
Well, obviously that summit was also in the scale. I think that was called Great Scale. And that was like one of the things we'd realized was that, not only should Reid be writing this book, teaching this class, and doing this podcast, but also we should actually bring a group of people who are all tackling these problems and have them meet each other, have them meet a bunch of interesting content on the stage, and try to amplify these journeys.
So true. And one of the things, so Joe Gebbia from Airbnb, we'd been in the same circles before. He'd been here to Creative Live. We reconnected at the event, and he's been on the show. Recorded with Joe not too long ago. So in the, I guess...
I learned things from Joe. Joe's design sense is awesome.
Amazing, right? Incredible. And that's one of the things I'm kind of doing is I want to flip the script on you here and see how you do. So what Joe advocates, and I advocate here on Creative Live, has been to do unscalable things. And the example of unscalable, and then you figure out how to scale them, obviously, if they work. But with Joe, and to hearken to some of the audience here who are watching today, one of the biggest game changers in their trajectory was professional photographs of the spaces at Airbnb. And he said at first, him and Brian, they went door to door for the top 20 properties in New York before they were anything and photographed them, as opposed to dirty dishes in the sink and having the owners of the Airbnbs photographs themselves. So they went there, very unscalable to have the founding team backpacking around New York for 5 days to take all these photographs. And Joe, touts that as a game changer for, like, literally when they started doing professional photographs, the trajectory of their business changed. So as someone who advocates scale and being a master of it, how does this wildly creative but non-scalable activity, how do you reconcile those things?
Well, so as you probably know, actually, in fact, Joe and Brian Chesky were both at RISD, and the title of the episode that featured Brian was Handcrafted, right?
Yeah.
Which is, first you have to do things that don't scale in order to scale. And so the story about going door to door with pictures, some other things were all things that were part of that episode. And look, the normal thing is everyone presumes that you should start doing the scalable things right away. It's one of the mistakes that comes in. And almost never are you actually building the scale the first thing that you're doing with it.
And if you did, you just imagine trying to buuld all the things to scale on day one, you'd never get 90% of them done.
Death. You'd actually just never get anywhere. You just die. and so part of what you do is you say, okay, whether it's product market fit and resonance with customers, whether it's it's the same reason why you prototype. Let's see how this works. Let's see which parts of this are particularly important to do. And so part of what Brian and Joe do is that they have this process they call 10-star design. I don't know if you've heard this from them, but it's like, what's the 10-star experience? And so he said, okay, well, say you're going somewhere. Well, the 10-star experience is your plane lands, and the entire city of San Francisco is lined up in a row to greet you.
To welcome you.
The mayor is there, with flowers and a beverage, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, well, we can't do 10 stars. What does 9 stars look like? And so forth, down to, oh, wait, 7 stars we can do scalably, right? And so let's do that. And so it's a design process, and then it's a prototype and try it. And it's actually at every level. It's not just product, it's also frequently organization, frequently questions around kind of like unique strategies and go-to-market.
Yeah.
All of those things have this initial handcrafted phase.
To me, that's, I think it's the Eames brothers, if a quote about, the makers of the chairs and furnitures. The details aren't the details are the thing. And to me, that's one of the things that Airbnb has, and especially in their, in the last 5 years, have just done such an amazing job on the details.
Yeah.
Now,
and by the way, they're doing that now because in November, they released this thing called Magical Trips, which is we could make any place in the world a tourist destination because we enable the creativity and the entrepreneurship of kind of micro entrepreneurs to create an experience. So, for example, you say, well, why would Detroit be a tourist destination? Great art scene, great urban farming, like a bunch of things. And you could have a entrepreneur say, I am going to make Detroit a fascinating lens into the modern American cultural experience. And then a person might want to go for that. And they're handcrafting it right now.
Yeah, and they're just doing such a good job. I was just on the phone with one of the folks that runs their photography department. They're just, it's beautiful to watch them work right now. They're just really hitting a stride, I think is cool. So if we've been talking about small, handcrafted for a little bit, I want to go back to scale for a second. And as there's so few folks who are on the other end of these cameras who are ever going to build something that scales. I think here at Creative Live, we've got 10 million students. It's like when you have 50,000 students, you want 100,000. When you have 100,000, you want 1 million. And when we hit 5 million, I'm like, 5 million, we're just getting started. I want 10. Now 10 is not interesting. I want 100 million. And yet there are so many lessons that folks who are listening can apply. Help me uncork just a couple of the lessons that for, again, if there's 1,000 people who are watching right now who are ever going to build a company that, and if there's 100,000 people watching, maybe 1,000 ever going to build a company that has more than 1,000 employees. Yep. So, but yet there has to be so many lessons for the folks at home to take home. Why don't you uncork a couple of those for me?
So, so we've done the initially, don't try to figure out scale first, try to figure out other things, and then be thinking about scale as you're figuring that out in order to try to reshape it.
Almost with Cheryl's lens on it.
Yes, exactly. Another one is you very much need a strong company culture in order to scale, because especially if you're scaling quickly, what I call blitz scaling, because you can get to a chaotic mess. And essentially, you need to have horizontal accountability in the culture, where it isn't like we are this from the CEO. It's we all know we're this, and we're all holding each other accountable, including the individual employee holding the CEO accountable to this is our mission. And so intentionally designing a culture. And part of a good culture isn't just we are excellent. That's idiotic. Right? Yeah. Everyone's seeking to be excellent. A good culture is this is who we are, and this is why some A players wouldn't work here, and this is where we would take pain and suffering in order to stay true to our culture. And so, for example, early on LinkedIn, what we realized is we were going to make a lot of our revenue from companies, but like our first cultural value is members first. E.g., the people who use the site for free are actually, in fact, our top customers. Not our only customers, but our top customers, because businesses naturally orient towards revenue. Yeah. So like, oh, the companies are our customers. No. Each individual member. And so part of the sacrifice is, yes, we will sacrifice some revenue. Yes, we will sacrifice some things that our other valuable customers, companies will want, because individuals are our top customer. And that's part of how you define culture in some good way. And then the last one, and there's obviously 10 different episodes in Masters of Scale, and there's a book that will be coming out hopefully next year. Presume I'm writing fast enough.
Some work to do.
Yes. But one of the key things is also to understand triage. So I think the episode with Selena Tabakawala, who is the founder of Gixo, was titled, kind of fun, these are all June titles, Burn Baby Burn. But it's, you have to let fires burn, right? So part of it in the scaling thing is there's multiple fires, and you focus on the ones that you have to do now and let the other ones deal with later, which is, it leaves you a little bit of a sunburn and a bunch of other things. Right? There's definitely scar tissue.
This makes me feel good. Just keep telling me this. There's plenty of fires burning right now.
Yes, exactly. And part of the experience that you learn, and part of why, like, for example, a network of advisors and support and everything else is helping with that triage. Right, and so those are amongst some of the kind of key lessons for figuring out scalability. And what's more, I think the interesting thing is, even if people are not themselves entrepreneurs trying to build these businesses, I think it's useful for large companies to know. I think it's useful for people who are trying to understand, well, what are the kinds of, why is it that Silicon Valley is going and having the impact it is, and how do I understand how to participate, navigate, understand that kind of transformation in the world?
Yeah, and those same principles in some way, shape, or form apply to small businesses. Like, there is a culture in a small business, and if your culture isn't accountability to the people to your left and to your right, and it's just to your boss, it's going to be a problem. All right, so for the folks that are building companies, that's a new thing that we're talking about a lot here. We've got folks like Red Bull and Microsoft, and we're helping them educate in creativity and innovation are the hot buzzwords right now. I think one of the things that we've done great here is emotional intelligence, how to be a great speaker, presenter, good body language, and yet when let's see, what's the right way of getting at this? So I wonder if that's the right way to go. Well, for the folks at home who are never going to scale a big company and for whom these skills are critical, what's the lens that what is the lens that these big companies put on that stuff? Do they care about creativity and innovation? Do they care as we think about having to work with them, or what is Facebook think about creativity and innovation? What does how important are these soft skills to the companies? Because this is almost a personal ask here. Like,
Yep.
I never anticipated building an enterprise side of Creative Live, and now it's just all this it's coming over the transom. Tell me that it's valuable, or tell me to, bark up a different tree. And if it's valuable, why?
So, well, it's obviously very valuable. It's difficult to teach and help cause learn, and it's difficult to. It's a little bit like, everyone knows that you need to be innovative in the modern world, and then you say, "What is that?" And it's like, much more challenging. And so, but
it's on the edge of, it's like what made me want to go here, and it's a little bit of a squishy topic, but it's the culture part, because we need a culture of creativity and innovation. You need a culture of transformation and helping people, like all the soft skills. They used to be nice to have, and now it's obvious that the companies that are masters at that, they promote that. So how should people think about learning these skills?
Well, so look, I think people have a natural aversion. Actually, people tend to be more risk averse. So the bulk of humanity tends to be, I want to avoid error more than I want to accomplish amazing things.
Yeah.
And it's reasonable enough, it's rational, it's part of how we get trained. It's like, for example, avoiding the, being eaten by the lion is more important than getting the banana.
Yes, sure.
So
our 2 million-year-old brain is telling us this.
Yes, exactly.
It's getting in our way.
Yeah, so, rational enough and understood. But the challenge is that actually, in fact, more and more of how we navigate our careers is like playing it safe is actually slow death, right, versus a chance at serious life. And so part of what you need to say, okay, I need to figure out how I can be creative. Being creative will always involve some risk. Yes. There's always that sense of vertigo in creativity, because it's like, I did this thing and I think it's amazing, but it's not always amazing.
And I'm scared.
Right? And so from an individual point of view, you need to navigate that, and you need to learn the skills, and you need to be able to take the risk. And then from a company and a culture point of view, you need to be sufficiently encouraging. It doesn't mean, like, actually one of the funniest things I saw from a company once is, we celebrate failure. And you're like, that's idiotic. Nobody does that, right? Nobody in Silicon Valley celebrates failure. What we celebrate is learning, and learning fast, which includes failure and recovery. Yeah. And so having that in your culture, which is, how do we essentially kind of build something amazing, is really cool. And I'll give you an example of a modern kind of CEO context. The team that built the Alexa Echo is the same team, more or less, that built the Kindle Fire Phone. Now you say, okay, Kindle Fire Phone, not a big commercial success. The normal
that was the nicest way it's ever been put.
Yes.
Not a big commercial success.
Well,
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jeff may be on the show someday. We got to preserve our.
Right. So, but part of Jeff being a great CEO is he didn't do what you would expect, like a MBA program, and say, well, that's the team, and you get rid of them, and da. He went, no, okay, look, we took that shot. What's our next good shot?
Yeah.
Oh, building this other device. And so literally, that whole team moved over to that, minus the people who just only wanted to work on phones.
Yeah.
I mean, literally the same team. And that's the kind of culture that, if you have it, encourages people to continue to take creative shots.
Yeah.
And when they look around and see that's how other people are treated, oh, maybe I can too. Maybe I can actually go take that risk and so forth, because as long as I'm learning, making a really intelligent play for it, and recovering and playing again, that I know that the company has, my back, has this alliance with me, and that's super valuable.
Beautifully put. Thank you for bringing my I wasn't quite sure how to get at it. We'll talk about the alliance in a second, which you just mentioned. Before we do, I think we're going to keep pulling on this thread, which is some of the things that that the modern company, small, medium, and large, have to focus on, because it creates amazing things. The inputs need to change in order to create greater outputs and more impressive outputs. And one of those things that's become wildly evident is diversity and inclusion. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I know it's on the hearts and minds and lips of a lot of smart folks, but you have, I think, a unique perspective on it. So talk to me about that if you can.
Silicon Valley very justly gets some criticism about not being sufficiently diverse and inclusive. And there's kind of two simplistic points of view on this. One simplistic point of view is to say, hey, look, it's a meritocracy and all just works out, and these people are all idiots, right? Like there are many more talented minorities who are capable of playing this game that are in this game right here.
Yep.
And so, full stop, that statement is just categorically wrong.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So simple view one. Simple view number two is, oh, it's all because you're sexist, racist, etc., and you're and the whole industry is corrupt down to the last, usually in this case, white man standing, or white Chinese Indian in the Silicon Valley case, and that no one's really trying to work on this and make it happen,
right.
and so it's just a bunch. And the truth is, we have a serious problem we need to fix, and it's a hard problem, right? And you actually need to get through it. And part of it goes everything from pipeline issues, which you have to work on, to putting extra energy. It's a little bit like when you know there's a problem, if you think you're a good person, are you putting extra energy, every single person, to trying to solve this?
Yep. Over-indexing on that problem.
Yes. Because that's how you say, yes, I care about this, yes, I'm doing it, not I'm just going to sure, I care about diversity, if it so happens to be the right diverse candidate calls me, then hey, I'll hire them.
Yeah.
Like, no, you care, you work,
Yep.
right? You put energy and blood into it. Now, I think one of the things that you're also referring to is, a couple weeks back, I wrote a post called the Diversity Pledge, because we have a particular problem in the venture industry, and that there's the vast majority of venture capitalists are men. That's part of the diversity problem of something that we need to improve seriously. And Greylock's been working on it, and other firms have been working on it. There are firms that are actually really working on this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to see.
But the problem is there doesn't exist essentially an HR function between VCs and entrepreneurs. And if you roughly say, say there's 3,000 VCs, I don't know what the number is in Silicon Valley, some percentage of them, 10, 5, 2, 20, something, don't understand that that any kind of sexual approach to people from within the positions of entrepreneurs pitching them for money is wrong, the same way that a company manager would say, hey, it's just consenting adults, or a university professor would say, hey, it's just consenting adults, and no.
There's a power dynamic.
There's a power dynamic. It is categorically unacceptable. It makes the other person feel unsafe, makes them feel unwelcome, makes them feel that this is not the right place for them, that people don't care. And so it's bad, right?
Straight up bad.
Straight up bad.
Yeah.
And so what happened is Reid Hoffman, the reporter for The Information, wrote this excellent story, very well researched, and there was insufficient protest and outrage about this. And I had been feeling it, and I read through a post from Sarah Lacey on Pando, and I went, she's exactly right. And so I got up early one Friday morning, more to create a kind of a shaped, here is how we can put a set of voices together on this, which is, look, until we establish what the right HR functions, everything else are, which have to have investigation and have to look at this with some judicious. Now Reid did that. He interviewed a ton of women, got 3 of them on the record, right? 3 other ones reporting similar incidences not on the record. So you don't have a he said, she said, as I put in my post. You have a he said, they said, very different category of argument and response. And we should simply say, all of us will simply not do business with these people. Whether you're an LP, a GP, an entrepreneur, you find this and don't do business with them. And that's a minimum statement. It's in the direction. And then part of this modern social media world is you create a hashtag for it, you create a movement for it, so that people can sign up. That was Decency Pledge, and that I think has had some positive implications.
Just, again, Decency Pledge.
Yes.
Folks at home. Yeah, it's really, it's turned into something very powerful.
And I think we're now looking at what are the things that we do in order to help cement and make the inertia towards that much better pattern behavior. Now, one thing I want to say, because some of the comments on this stuff I thought was it's just important to mention is, look, there are a bunch of bad jerks with terrible behavior. And we should disallow that as much as possible. That doesn't mean, that's still a minority. It's only a small percentage of them. And so then people say, Silicon Valley bad, tech industry bad. So there's like, no. Some jerks. And we should not let the jerks be jerks.
Hold them accountable.
Yes, and hold them accountable. And part of the reason, like probably the central drive I had for this is the more entrepreneurs, including most especially, because it's heavily underrepresented, is women entrepreneurs that we have, the more creativity we'll have, the more great companies we'll have, the more talent and
the data is pretty clear. They actually grow companies. Women grow companies faster than men on X axes.
It's super important.
Right.
And so literally there's a moral principle, but it's also just a self-interested principle. We want to make sure that they all feel like, yes, this is a welcoming community. This is a place that I can play. This is things I can do. And it's beholden on all of us to make that happen.
I just wanted to applaud you for taking the stand that you did. That was really inspirational, and there's a ton of work to do. We're at Creative Live. We are on average 100% higher than Silicon Valley and or national averages on women in leadership across every single position, from manager to executive team.
Awesome.
I'm really proud of that. And I think the on the other side of diversity and inclusion is not any sort of quota, but just the richness of the environment, the opportunity for great ideas coming from a wide range of backgrounds and disciplines, and to me, that's just been so empowering. It's been really fun. And I think that's a message that I want to make sure that people out there in the world hear. So I've got a couple of notes here. One of them is about leadership. And I think you have either hired, coached, mentor, or are yourself one of the best leaders in entrepreneurship today. And I look at Jeff Weiner as an amazing leader. He's someone who James introduced you to, if I'm not mistaken. You hired him CEO of LinkedIn. Also, his record is impeccable. He's just an amazing leader. But you also get to see leaders, and this is leaders of all company sizes, because there are people that have 3 employees that walk into Greylock. And
sometimes one.
Yeah, sometimes one, employee of one, right? I got an idea, and I'm the sole employee. What are some of the most classic mistakes that you see leaders making, and at any scale or any size?
Well,
I mean,
there's obviously a ton. The list of errors is much longer than the list of successes and tools and techniques. Let's see. Let's go for some of the more subtle and important ones.
Okay.
The first is that the game changes. This is a little bit like the Masters of Scale and Blitz scaling and everything else. And frequently what happens is what got you here is not what should get you there. And so, like, for example, another of the kind of lessons in that we might in the next Masters of Scale season focus as an episode is you go from doers to managers and doers, or all managers are also doers, to managers of doers, to executives of managers, and this whole the whole nature of the leadership game changes as you go through this
over time,
the sequence, and you have to constantly be asking yourself, what does the new game look like? So sure, you might have learned, you might have really done the old game, but it's a new game, right? And so that's one. And sometimes, by the way, the importance of culture, the importance of high integrity, all of those stay the same. But for example, how do you manage communications, or what are your responsibilities as a leader? Those kinds of things change. So that's one. I'd say another is to really actually think about, so again in scaling, and that pattern is people tend a little bit to try to get to stay too comfortable, and some parts of it are important. So, for example, one of the things I learned from Jeff is the importance of the parallels between Jeff Weiner, the leadership team and sports teams, which is an efficiency of working together, a shorthand of working together, a ability to make decisions, an effect of a shared context, and a set of those things that really make a high performance team. And that's super important. But you also want to be thinking a lot about when do you make transitions. And it's another person that I met through Jeff is a guy named Reid Hoffman, who is an excellent author of a book called Conscious Business, which I think is actually, in fact, one of the things that when you think about, like people say, well, you're making transitions in leadership, it's because you're hard-edged and you're making that difficult decision where you shove that person off the boat and so forth. And actually, in fact, Fred makes this awesome and very important point in the book, which is, if you think of compassion, is like, take for example doctors working on patients, and you say, well, this doctor is not doing their job well. Well, when you actually get them out of the building, you're actually being hugely compassionate with their patients. And so compassion is this aggregate thing. It's your customers, it's your employees, it's the set of things. And so you have to have compassion for the whole group, which sometimes can be something difficult for an individual or a small number of individuals, but you're trying to maximize compassion across it. And that's another thing that Jeff Weiner is a great theorist and practitioner and leader in. But you need to think about changes in your team. You need to think about okay, I have a deep loyalty to this person, but how is it, like when you're going through these scales, how is it that we now really need to reconfigure in order to be appropriate for the compassion for our customers, the compassion for our employees, and compassion for the whole group of these things. And sometimes that involves difficult changes. Of course, that always means that you're as good for the individual as you absolutely can be, and you put energy in. But that's another mistake, is to not recognize the needs and desires, like for the right compassion, the right mission outcome, that you need to make changes. And so, and like for example, myself, to apply that all the way, I tend to very strongly go, if I'm doing a job and I think there's someone else who's gettable, who would be better at that job, I always trade for them. That's part of the reason I hired Jeff Weiner. Right? It's like, I wanted someone who was world class and who wakes up on Saturday morning going, how do I build an awesome organization doing this? That's one of the things I do. Where I tend to think about product problems and business model problems and strategy problems, and I kind of think, okay, I'll do the org in order to do that, but the org is not how I live, breathe, bleed, etc. And I was like, job needs someone better, Jeff's better.
Voila.
Yeah.
Well, I think Jeff is one of the most highly rated CEOs that I've ever seen, and very inspirational on the tone of empathy, compassion, compassionate leader. For folks at home, if you're interested in leadership, Jeff is an amazing guy. How about I wanted to go back to the Alliance. I put a pin in that, and I want to circle back. First book was The Startup of You. Second book was The Alliance, and I'm going to give just a brief overview and then ask you a couple specific questions. So for the folks at home, The Alliance it's realizing and recognizing that the relationship between employer and employee is changing. The dynamic used to be 40 years, gold watch, retire, sail off into the sunset, and now it's very different. And the hope is that a company can add value to the employee beyond just the paycheck. And the way that you do that is by having a relationship. And so as an employee, you could come into an organization that believes in this principle and know that you're going to grow and develop. And that's the thing that we promise here at Creative Live. And in turn, the company gets people who are dedicated, who are not going to be mercenaries, and who want to serve a couple tours of duty, learn some things. And the question, now that I've set that background, the question is, why did you write that book? Doesn't that harm you? You can still operate on those principles, but now everyone's got the secret. And obviously, there's a little tongue-in-cheek here, but share with me.
So I'll just be biographical narrative. Okay. So how the book came about was that I had written this book, The Startup of You, which we did a show on
here at Creative Live. Yep, it's a great show.
And part of that book, The Startup of You, came from the commencement speech that I gave my high school, the Putney School, because I was like, what do I say to a bunch of high school students? Like, what does my path have to do with, and by the way, it's a very art school, and everyone else like, what does my entrepreneurial path have to do with them? Because like very few end up being entrepreneurs. They end up being educators, NGOs, a bunch of other things, broadly. I mean, obviously there's a whole spectrum. And so what I did is be the entrepreneur of your own life. Learn, like the modern life is, you don't have to start companies, but the skill set of entrepreneurs is the skill set that you need for a meaningful, successful, stable, safe, all of those things, modern life. And so So I gave that speech, sent the commencement speeches, the only ones I write, so I sent it around. People said, oh, you should write the book. I went, I'm too busy. Oh, Ben wrote this other really good book, and maybe Ben will do this with me and we could do that. And so Ben Kesnoka and I did that together. And then what happened is, after I did all that, I went, oh, I'm here at LinkedIn, and yes, there's a shared philosophy behind LinkedIn and the Startup Review, but I should like send this to all of our corporate clients. And then I went, oh, if I sent this to our corporate clients, they'd go, oh, you're telling me my employees should quit and start businesses, even though it's about being adaptive, creative, entrepreneurial, like just not necessarily starting companies, but just being you is how you live and work. And so I went, all right, let's write an essay about why it's so critical to have these talented, creative people, and how do you hire, manage, and recruit them? And what are some of the things that people like me and other people here in Silicon Valley do for that? And so I wrote up an essay, sent it off to HBR, because I figured, okay, Harvard Business Review would be the place to do this. And they said, oh, we'd love to publish this essay, but would you really like to publish the book? And I was like, book. Right. And so we...
And they signed you up for another 6 months worth of work then, didn't they?
Yes. But Ben Kesnoka and Chris Shea, we all came together, and that was actually the simplest book process that at least I've participated in, because it was literally just describe what you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And make that available to folks. And we got some critique saying, look, this is only true for high growth industries. This is more true for tech. This is true for when you have a lot of creative talent. And all of which is partially true, but I'd say the whole world's going that way.
Yeah.
Right? And so, look, this is the understand the whole world's going that way. And there's a particular thing, it doesn't surprise me that you gave the strong positive rendition of here's the solution and we do, this is you.
Yeah.
But there's another particular thing that was that we detailed in the book, which was important to understand. It's like most people say, well, that's for the aspirational or for the stars versus the whole company. It's like, no, it's for the whole company. In the modern work world, we all know that people don't, the general rule is you don't work at one company your whole life. You go work at a number of companies. Mm-hmm. And then you think, how many times does the manager and the employee have that conversation about that possibility?
Zero.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Zero.
Then you say, okay, what is the implication of that? Because they both know it. Everybody knows it. And no one's talking about it. It erodes trust. Because if there's something that's a real issue between us, like, oh, well, maybe one or both of us are going to go work other places and we're not talking about it at all, then that means we don't really have a trusted relationship. Yeah. Oh, you want to have a company without trusted relationships?
Good luck.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Trust and accountability are the core to growing anything.
Yeah. So have a real conversation. And part of the real conversation is, look, we might love you to work here your entire life, but it may not make sense for you. What we'd really love you to do is help transform our company, and then we will make sure that your career is on a transformative path, whether it's with us or elsewhere. And that's the premise of the Alliance.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It really is. And I read it as I came back to take over CEO a few years ago and needed to do some rebuilding, and it was so helpful, thoughtful. It's the things that everyone's thinking and no one's saying.
Yes.
That, to me, makes a great business book. So embedded in there, I think, is a little bit of you personally. And we've talked about your companies, your scale, your show, your firm, leadership principles, very theoretical. I want to talk about you for a few minutes here. And a question is there a part of your schedule, your personal schedule, that you protect from outside influence such that you have room for the big boulders? Because real thought, transformative thought, meaningful, those are the big boulders. And as someone who is always working on self-improvement and trying to find the right recipe here, what are the big boulders that you put in the pitcher of water first to raise the level of the water such that you can drink it? And all the little boulders, they go around that. So what are your big boulders? How do you protect, create, cultivate the schedule that you want such that you've got room to do these things?
So I need to do that better. That's not one of the things that I do particularly well. Part of it is that I have a few too many day jobs at the moment. So there's LinkedIn and Microsoft, there's Greylock, there's portfolio companies, there's working on books, podcasts, There's trying to avoid what I think of as the Trumpocalypse,
Yes.
right? In terms
yes.
of this.
Yes.
And so a whole stack of things, and so that means that I'm actually enormously reactive across a large set of things. Now, in theory more than in practice, right?
Okay.
But I work towards.
I appreciate your vulnerability here. I want you to know that.
I work towards the practice. What I find is that in order to be seriously creative, I need to essentially clear my mind usually the night before. So I need to not be redlining, getting stuff done up to whatever hour, but also like stressing and like the evening before needs to be, it doesn't have to be sedate, but it has to be the kind of calming, kind of ready. Good night's sleep, and then the very first thing, get up and don't accept any other interruptions. And is it a half day, 3 days, whatever the thing is, then immerse yourself in that. Minimum 2 to 3 hours to really get going. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll try to do that if I'm really working, is I'll try to repetitively do calm 4 hours, other stuff for the rest of the day, calm 4 hours, calm 4 hours as a way to do that. Because I also find that, or even spaced out, like not like 1 day a week or that kind of thing. Because what I find is the background processes of I'm working on it, I tackled it, and then I put it back on the shelf, and then I pull it off the shelf, is very helpful for coming up with the right ideas.
Yeah. And common in that answer, I've had so many great thinkers and friends and peers and leaders like yourself here on the show, and that is a theme, just real blocks of time where it's quiet. And those of us who lead chaotic lives, you're always traveling, and there's a lot of interesting things, and we're like crows, we see shiny objects, we're passionate about that. There's no one's ever said, I do my best work in the throes of problems. You can be your best because you can rise to the occasion, but your best, biggest, freest thinking, no one's ever said that it happens when stuff's going haywire. So it's refreshing. B, I find it interesting, would you consider yourself a morning person because you want to get up and be active, or is that just on the back end of a quiet evening followed by 7 or 8 hours of sleep, and is it the quiet before that is cultivating that opportunity?
I find that my creativity goes down the more different projects and different emergencies that I've responded to, right? So it isn't so much necessarily a morning person as much as to have maximally distanced myself from the triaged firefighting that is most of my life.
Yeah.
And so that's the calming of the evening, and then the sleep, and then you get up and you're not being interrupted.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is when I'm at my most creative. That's when I'm at my most kind of blank page. That's when I prefer to read. Like I prefer, if I'm going to try to read, whether it's anything from *Sapiens* to *The Seventh Sense* or any of these super interesting books over the last few years. What I try to do is I try to say I want to be able to read it and have it stimulate my own thinking, stimulate my creativity. But that means I need to not be going, oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to get that done. Oh, wait. This problem needs to be solved. This might solve it.
Yeah.
Because that's what the normal pace is. And if that's already been activated, it's hard for me to calm down from it. I can.
Yeah.
But it's much better to just have it all quiet when I'm focused.
Yeah, and thanks again for being vulnerable. Say you're not as good at that as you want to be.
I am this.
But that's something that the folks at home, and I'm trying to get good. I've been a terrible sleeper my whole life. I'm focusing on sleeping. Ariana's been bashing me about that, of course. But
there's these dimmers on the computers and phones.
Oh yeah. You got my phone damn near turns orange at like 10 o'clock. I'm like, I remember I did this so it was easier on my eyes, and I very much want to turn this up so I can see this, but I resist. But as a result, I've become really protective of my mornings, and so it's lovely to hear a little bit about your routine. On similar tip, is there a belief, I'm trying to get people to sort of continually examine their belief, is there a belief that you once held that you feel like you have reversed course on? And
there's probably a number of those.
In the most, in recent...
Let's see. I'm trying to think of which one would be most
Yeah, and I
interesting
hate
in
these
this
questions
context.
as an interviewee because
Yes.
you're like, do I have to pick the perfect answer right now?
Yes.
Like, what 3 albums
Yes.
are your favorite? You're like, seriously, right now? My
Yes,
3 favorite
exactly.
albums? Like, oh my God, I don't want to say the wrong
Yes.
ones, but just it can be something small. And again, the point behind the scenes here is that we're all always
Yes.
evolving.
Oh, you don't know.
You know?
And if you're actually, one of my favorite questions of people is, what would you tell yourself if you were to call yourself, like for example, if you call yourself at the beginning, I'm not saying you should answer this question, but at the beginning of
Yes, he is.
Creative Live, but
Yeah.
the beginning of Creative Live, what would you tell yourself to do differently?
Yeah.
Because if you actually hadn't evolved your approach, your skill set, it's not perfect knowledge of the future, but
Yeah.
this is what you're not learning.
Yeah.
Like changing your mind
Oh my gosh, I would change so many things.
is correlated
Yeah.
with learning,
Yeah.
right? And so, and beliefs, by the way, you should learn your beliefs too. Beliefs are not kind of
handed down.
down and fixed forever. I'd say that
Well, even that is a thing, right? Just that your beliefs, if they're not always changing, then that's actually probably a sign of you not learning.
yes, exactly.
Like maybe that's the meta.
Yeah.
That's the meta.
Well, you should definitely be thinking, and so that's the reason I'm kind of indexing through the set of things. I guess what I would probably say is that in interesting ways, I've both become more optimistic and pessimistic about human nature. So it isn't like I've just become more optimistic, or it isn't like it's a changing shape. And
Are there certain axes under which, is that how you are? You're doing both at the same time?
Yeah, and well, like for example, on one hand, I think that when I look at a lot of people's behavior in groups, we have a real possibility of not just having kind of wisdom of the crowd, but madness of the masses, right? And so, like I was obviously, seriously dismayed with many Americans' choices of Trump as president. I thought if you look at the tweets, if you look at the things he says, if you look at, kind of the question of everything from implying, like, all Mexicans are rapists, or they're saying they're rapists here, which is like just an evil statement, right? And anti-American, not the America that many of the people that I know and love bleed for, right? And so that makes you more pessimistic because you're like, look, I can get it saying, look, we believe, as I do not, that, Trump's a successful business person will help us return to business. But it's like, you cannot defend that position. You can't defend Trump without at least talking about how evil these things are. There's no such thing as alternative facts. Science is important. I mean, you go down and down. Reading is important. Knowledge is important. Compassion is important. Acknowledging error. He's never done that. That kind of thing is super important. And so increasing pessimism, because you see that happen.
Sure.
And then on the other hand, part of what is kind of delight as I get older is I think I used to have a kind of a simple model of heroism, where heroes were the people like, the 300 Spartans who protected Greece from the Persians, like this. And I think I've been delighted to see more everyday heroism. And part of where I'm remembering that, and this was, when Ken asked me, it was kind of like, in a sense, what was the most recent stuff is last week I was at the MIT Media Lab because Joey Ito and a crew of folks there and I have helped create this thing called the MIT Media Lab Disobedience Prize. And the event was called Defiance, and it was, when do you take personal risk for social good? And we had the whistleblowers for the Flint water crisis who were up there. We had two of the elders from the Standing Rock movement. We had a climatologist who had been arguing climate's changing against a lot of pressure from very early. And we had these two women teachers, professors, who had created Freedom University in Georgia because Georgia had made it illegal in universities to teach undocumented people. And they said, look, education is how we progress. Education is how we become who we are. It's almost like a human right. So we're going to go create Freedom University. And like sitting on stage with these people, having given them these awards and everything else, was a reminder of of despite the fact that I have these intense unhappiness, about pessimism, of kind of madness in the masses and some things going on, that we have these everyday heroes as well. And so that's the complicated weave.
That's life, right?
Yeah.
It's never linear. It's never, and to me, I think the way you framed it is super appropriate. And I think the lens on which everyday people, that's another really important thing that I want to put a pin in this episode, is that because we're talking about scale and building big companies, and what I've always loved about you as a leader, I consider you a friend, advisor, that it's always at the human level, the one-to-one. And your background, I don't know if it's a background, but how you see technology and humanity interacting. I know you talked about yourself as an anthropologist at your core. That's about people.
Yes.
And so I guess as I want to transition here, I want to get to your philanthropy in just a second, but talk to me about the lens, this what I think is a very unique lens from someone in your position that you put on the individual. Like, you end up betting on not just ideas in the venture world, but you bet on humans. You, even just the examples you've given just now of everyday heroes. So what role does the individual play in Reid Hoffman's landscape?
Well, so in Startup View, it's both I and we both matter, right? And again, false dichotomies. Some people go, we is only matters, vanish I, and I is only matters, vanish we. It's like, no, both. It's individuals in a tribe, in a group, and so forth. And so individuals, in my view, and sometimes, like Eastern philosophers may think this is an overly Western perspective, going back to the philosophy background. Individuals, I think, are fundamental. It's the accountability, the onus that all of us have are the instruments of change, right? The decision to make a difference, the decision to do something, the decision to take a risk. That's part of the reason leadership's so important. And so, like, roughly speaking, for example, as an investor, I almost never invest in somebody unless I think that they are what I call infinite learners, which is capable of learning the things at speed in order to make this game go, because the entrepreneurship game changes constantly. And so I am a huge believer in the importance and centrality of individuals and individual choices and individual responsibility and individual power in order to make stuff happen, leadership. On the other hand, people frequently calling themselves libertarians, and I also think, all there is individuals. And I actually think, no, we're individuals in alliance, we're individuals in a group, we're individuals in shared mission, spirit, and team, et cetera, right? And so I think that the thing is where you say, well, I'm the I that's also part of the we, and that both matter. And so, for example, again, in good leaders in entrepreneurship, when you have an entrepreneur who says, well, it's all about me, they're almost always going to be terrible leaders, and they're almost always going to construct like companies that aren't going to scale. Right, you really want people who go, how do I get as many amazing people who are, more amazing than me, to help with this mission? And those are the kinds of leaders that usually go a very long way.
Awesome. Embedded in there was a little bit of a hint towards your work as a philanthropist. And Tim Ferriss, good friend of mine, 10-year friend, we've both been on his show before. And there's a lot of crossover between our audiences. And you talked on one of the podcasts that you did with Tim about some of the nonprofit work that you're excited about. And there's been so many names dropped. We've talked a lot about books. People are taking notes. We'll have this in the show notes, of course. But rather than just say, how do you support Reid Hoffman in Reid's life as a business person, let's talk about Reid as a philanthropist, and what are some things you're doing? I know you've been involved in Change and Kiva, and there's all kinds of stuff. Like, what are some ways that people who love your message can support you? Talk to me about some of your nonprofit stuff.
So there's many good missions, great missions in the world. And for me, part of what I do is I say, okay, which ones do I have a unique tool set, Archimedean levers, to make a really big impact? Occasionally, I'll also do something just to support friends or because it has my own personal resonance or something.
Sure.
But by and large, the bulk of it is the very big changes. And so there's one swath that is, how do we create the right kinds of consumer internet technologies that make a huge difference? So Change.org, enable people to aggregate their voices to power, to companies, to governments, and say, change your point of view, change your policy, right? Change what you're doing here to make it more human, to make it more compassionate, yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's a whole stack around that. Individual empowerment, going back to individuals, kind of Kiva, it's like how do you enable individuals as micro-entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurship broadly, because part of how we make progress is we create these new industries, new jobs. So also Endeavor, which is high impact entrepreneurs around the world. I can keep going through various things. I mean, the most recent was, but like this is again where you look at where you can be. For me, when I can be kind of uniquely creative, Joe and I were sitting around, and I was like, look, I have this theory that universities can have a much bigger impact in the world by using prizes. And we talked about it some, and we talked about what the Media Lab's mission is, which is building things to solve things. And we came up with the essentially the Disobedience Prize, right?
I love it.
Right, and part of it is to, again, highlight the people who take personal risk for social good.
Yeah.
And it isn't just political. Like, obviously, amongst the amazing heroes of our, this of our last century America, Martin Luther King, et cetera, it doesn't always have to be political. Sometimes it's art, sometimes it's science, sometimes it's Galileo, right? And so okay, well, that's a unique idea. It isn't necessarily technology. It isn't necessarily entrepreneurship, but that kind of thing could actually have a big chance. I know the entrepreneur, the group to do it, the Media Lab, its award committee, Joey and so forth. And so there's a stack of things. And actually, for people who are curious, almost everything that I do that involves kind of serious philanthropy, I write about at some point, just so that people are aware of it. So for example, and then the other thing I think is important also to think about on philanthropy is like multiple scales. So yes, I do think about world impact mostly, but like local here to San Francisco, I've helped the Exploratorium a bunch because science museums and children and exploration, creativity, and then Second Harvest Food Bank down on the peninsula, because by the way, if you don't feed people,
just opens. That's pretty important.
Yeah. Right? Human potential. It's the raw squandering of human potential. And sometimes you say, look, if they can just get on their feet and get fed healthy food, they have a chance at doing something amazing.
Yeah.
And obviously, one of the other things, I think one of the things that I most try to shift America culture in the direction of is the Spider-Man line, which is with power comes responsibility. One of the things I fear comes too easily with kind of an individualist libertarian bent is to say, well, it's my money and everything else. Well, no, it's the money that you've gained by being part of this society. You have responsibility. And so we here in Silicon Valley, look, there's a bunch of people here who are suffering and in trouble. We should help them, right? Yeah. Doesn't mean you have to do everything. Doesn't have to drop, everything we're doing. Yeah. But it's again that what are you doing to instantiate the fact you're a good person, that you are responsible and you're doing something. And so this year, for me, it's the Second Harvest Food Bank.
Huge. Yeah. Cool. I was just with Tony Robbins in New York last week. He's going to feed 100 million people this year. Yeah. The thought of just these fundamental things that, Scott Harrison has been on the show, Charity Water, that's just an amazing job. And I've always loved you seem to fight fires at so many different levels. You're just talking about massive global scale, and then the food bank down the street. So much for us to learn from you. I want to say thank you so much for being on the show. We'll make sure that to capture this is a very dense show. We'll try and we covered a lot of ground. I'll try and capture all the show notes. I want to say, again, thank you. Thanks to Greylock for the support that you guys have given us at Creative Live. Specifically, you've transformed a lot of lives, and I feel like you got a lot left to give. So thank you very much. Appreciate it for being on the show. If you're at home watching this, listening, wherever you are, in your ears, your eyes, stay tuned. There'll probably be another episode out tomorrow.